So, since morning, this is what I was wondering. Is Mongo dynamic?
Dynamic as in, like, what do you mean? Give me an example.
So, our servers, they have like limited memory, or like they are like 1 TB long or like 5 TB long.
Yeah.
See, from the looks of it, it looks like you
Yeah.
can expand it.
It just goes until it eats all your storage. Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to set like, it's not like DynamoDB where you're like, oh, you got to tell me exactly how much you need, and then I think that's more of a business decision for them, right? Because they charge for that, right? But no, Mongo's not like that. It'll just, I mean, this thing will eat your whole hard drive if you let it. Like I said, there's some scientific stuff behind how they calculate how much RAM they need, how much stuff they need. And then what did they allocate for indexes versus actual data versus what's actually on disk, and it's actually pretty smart the way they do it. But yeah, if you want to look more into that, you can look up what's called the Wired Tiger engine. If you Google that, you will find days and weeks worth of information about how that works. But yeah, you can just expand this stuff forever. You don't have to set limits when you create your database. But when you go get like a hosted database, yeah, it's going to be capped, right? It's like, oh, you get a terabyte. You want more, you got to pay for something, right? Because that's just what those machines that host those databases are capped to, right? So, yes.
So, how is consistency achieved in Mongo? Like in SQL Server, when someone's performing a write operation, it's just...
It blocks everything.
Yeah, like there's a locking mechanism which goes on and nobody can write it again, unless this user is done with his writing.
Yeah, so that's like a ACID compliant database. So the answer to that is Mongo 4 just came out, and Mongoose 5 supports this new thing, it's transactions. So it's the same way you would use transactions to basically create like a queue to block everything and get commands and put them in a queue, and then you run those commands and then you replay them back. So you can do that, but the thing is that this is running on Node, so everything's asynchronous. So although it's doing that on database, you might have another request that's coming in that's doing stuff too. So it can all still happen asynchronously, but the transactions protect you on the database level. So you can still do transactions, but you got to go back to think about like why would you need if you think about why you need transactions in the first place, it's because you have tables that are all like separated and like you need to perform one thing, but that one thing touches like 5 tables, right? So you got to make sure it does this, then this. Well, if this messes up, undo this. Whereas we're kind of like in Mongo, you can just put almost everything you need for one operation on one schema. So you don't really have to think about transactions. Transactions, that's why they added it so late, because it was an afterthought, because you could just get away without ever having to use transactions just by modeling your data with like nested objects. So if you nest your objects and everything belongs to one model, then you don't need transactions. It's only one thing to worry about. It's not many things. So like that's the way you have to think about it. But if you come from like a relational database background, you start modeling data in Mongoose, like very relational, like that's actually what I did. You run into the problem like I need transactions immediately. And that's what we were so glad when they came out with them. But then after sitting down and talking to the people at Mongo, I realized I was just modeling my data like SQL. I should have been modeling it like Mongo. And then we didn't need transactions anymore. But yeah, they have transactions.
I mean, if you were worried like about the multiple users using the same data, same record at the same time, you may want to implement something maybe to market or something. I don't know.
You mean like if two users were
editing the same thing, for example, like there was something like that.
Like if they were writing to it at the same time?
Yeah, it's like they're using the same piece of data.
Oh yeah, so like when you write to the database in Mongo, it doesn't actually write to the database. It writes it to like in memory. It writes it later. Right, it has like a journal log, yeah. So it doesn't write to disk immediately. It's like it writes everything in memory, so it can figure out like what's happening, like if it's a split-second thing, and then it can like dedupe it. So it can figure that stuff out. Like if you're writing to a database and it writes it in memory, if there's something already in memory that was operation that already happened on the same thing, it's just like a replay. Like it kind of knows what's happening there. So you don't have to lock the database because it's just in memory. Everything's in memory until it's not. And there's like a flush, and then it saves it, and then you're good.